Controllers and Treasurers, along with the Association of Government Accountants and the Association of Local Government Auditors. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on how digital trends are reshaping government financial management. My name is Kenny Pointer, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Association of State Auditors, Controllers, and Treasurers, or NASACT for short. And I'll be serving as your host for today's event. We're joined today by approximately 600 government accountants, auditors, and other interested parties from 50 different locations across the United States as well as Canada. As most of you know, digital technologies are fundamentally transforming the way state organizations conduct financial management, from the use of digital technologies to complex algorithms to machine learning. Today's webinar will provide a discussion of current digital trends shaping government financial management, as well as key findings from a Deloitte and NASACT 2015 Digital Transformation Survey that was presented at our conference last year in Chicago. Our speakers today will also explore how public sector financial executives can overcome barriers to digital adoption, ranging from culture, which we all know is a problem and a challenge, to workforce skills, also another challenge, to procurement processes. In addition, we'll learn today leading practices for taking a strategic approach to digital transformation and the 6 questions government leaders should consider to help accelerate their digital transformation. Lastly, we'll look at how specific technologies like artificial intelligence coupled with analytics are helping to transform the audit process for the future. We're really fortunate to have with us today some outstanding speakers, including Bill Eggers, a U.S. Public Sector Research Director with Deloitte. Also, Deborah Seals, Principal, State and Local Government, Deloitte. And Christina Dorfhuber, also a Principal, Core Government Services Leader with Deloitte. More information on Bill and Deborah and Christina can be found in their complete bios, which were provided to you in advance of today's webinar. Just a couple of housekeeping issues that we need to address before we get started. Today we are going to utilize interactive polling to gather your feedback during the presentation. Now, we've tried this at past webinars and the evaluations have always been very positive. The interactive polling will also be used to verify attendance today for individuals, not groups, but individuals. And I know we have a number of individuals participating today, so please make sure you answer those polling questions. It's our way of tracking your attendance. For groups, simply please answer in a way that reflects the consensus of your group, and attendance for groups will be monitored via the sign-in sheet. Following today's presentation, we will have approximately 20 minutes for live questions and answers. Today, as usual, we're allowing participants to receive audio through either their computer or their phone. And to ask your question, please use the raise your hand function of our webinar software. Simply click on the hand icon that's located in the toolbar. Now, just remember, if you are asking your question using your computer must have a microphone for that process to work properly. If you prefer, you can just type your question and send it to us at any time during the webinar using the Questions tab located in the toolbar on the right-hand side of your screen. And again, you can go ahead and type in your question at any point during today's webinar and go ahead and send that to us. In fact, we might take some intermittent breaks to ask a question during today's presentation. Our speakers will be using PowerPoint presentation, which you should be able to see on your screen now and was provided to you in advance. Now, if you're having any technical difficulties, please give us a call. Our number here is 859-276-1147. Again, that's 859-276-1147. We have a very full agenda today, and I want to express my gratitude to our speakers for taking time from their busy schedules to be with us today. And with that as a very brief background, let me turn the program over to our speakers. Bill, Deborah, and Christina, thank you. Welcome to today's webinar. And Christina, I think you're going to start us out by just describing today's agenda.
Yes, thank you so much, Kenny, and it's just a pleasure to be here and appreciate the opportunity to share this information with everybody. Kenny did a great job of providing the overview for the agenda. We're going to start out with Bill sharing a bit about the digital trends in public sector and more specifically having some of the conversation around more the areas in which NASACT is very interested. We'll speak to some of the digital strategies and the readiness factors that are currently being experienced, and we'll speak to a lot of the technologies and techniques for more efficient financial management and areas around treasury and audits as well. We'll launch into some discussions around some of the digital services and the challenges that you might experience, and as Kenny mentioned, there might be opportunities for us to engage in some additional conversation around that, and some of the big questions that we have found that you should be asking as you're going into these digital strategies. Debbie will be sharing with us the audit of the future and some really creative and new thinking that's going on right now in the audit space as it relates to digital, and then we'll speak to some key takeaways, and as mentioned, then finalize with a set of questions. So with that, and taking no more time in terms of going over the agenda, I'm going to turn it over to Bill.
Bill, are you there?
Yes, I am. I'm sorry, I was on mute. I think we're going to start with the first polling question right now. So if we can get that polling question up, we will test the consoles. And the first question is, what is your organization's readiness towards digital transformation? Are you discussing it? Do you have a strategy in place? Are you already doing implementation tools, or you're not even discussing it at this point, or you're not sure?
All right, thanks, Bill. We'll give everybody about 30 seconds to answer that question. Obviously, it's kind of a high-level question. Just give us a sense of our audience today. And as we wait on those results, just a reminder for individuals, make sure you answer these questions. It is our way of tracking your attendance. And Bill, we have the results up. I think you can probably see those here, but pretty well dispersed. 28% of our audience are discussing it. Only 11% have an actual strategy in place. 22%, which is pretty good, have actually implemented some tools. 9% have not discussed it. And about 30%, the highest answer, really not sure at this point.
Well, it's interesting. I think those results follow pretty closely with some of our survey results overall. So not surprising. So let's get right into them right now, Kenny. But before that, I wanted to start off with a little bit of scene setting here. And looking at digital technologies compared to other major technologies. What we're going through right now with the digital revolution is really the fifth major technology revolution that we've seen. And when you look back at some of the other huge technology revolutions, from the steam engine to electricity, what we find is that they all proceeded according to what's called the S-curve. What that means is that innovation and change happened rapidly at the onset, but then it leveled off, leading to periods of relative stability. And so what that leveling period allowed us to do is figure out, how do we use these technologies? How do we adjust to them? How do we optimize performance? How do we, as a bigger society and in business and in government, actually adjust to these very disruptive kind of technologies over time? And so they leveled off, and then they sometimes go back up again. But we saw this with each other burst of technology innovation throughout history. Now, with digital technology so far, it's a different story. What this slide shows is digital technologies in many respects, and this is whether we're talking about processing power or storage, or now some of the more exponential technologies like robotics and cognitive technologies and artificial intelligence, is that the improvements are proceeding at an exponential rate. And that means that they're not leveling off right now. And so they keep on getting better and better and better, and we've all heard of Moore's Law. And that we're seeing that in a number of these areas. And so what that means is that we're not having that period of time to actually sit back and figure out how to work with them, because the technologies are getting better so much faster, they're displacing other technologies. As an example, right when you might feel like you're figuring out mobile technologies and how to address mobile technologies, what comes along but the Internet of Things. And the Internet of Things, where we have essentially 2 trillion sensors that are going to be talking to each other, and that basically every device will be Internet enabled, and throughout our homes and our buildings and so forth. And that is coming very, very rapidly, and we're seeing other similar technologies. And so because of the exponential rate of these technologies, what it sometimes might feel like we're the Red Queen effect, right? That we're running in place, we keep on running and running and running, and we're not getting anywhere. And if it feels like that, then that is because of this rate of change. Now, eventually, it has to level off at some point in time. But so far, we're not seeing that leveling, and people who study this very closely don't believe that's going to occur anytime recently. So that presents both huge opportunities in terms of performance improvements and cost reduction and productivity enhancements, but it also presents some real challenges, especially from a cultural standpoint and workforce skills and so forth, and adjusting to these technologies and the pace of change we're seeing within them. Now, so we surveyed NASACT members, and we also, in conjunction with that, we also did another survey of over 1,200 government officials in 70 countries, which we think is the largest survey that's been completed to date on digital transformation of government. The numbers that we're going to be presenting to you today specifically look at the NASACT numbers, but we're happy to talk about how these might compare in some respects to other global financial organizations. In the study, we did do some comparison between the NASACT agencies versus what we're seeing in other countries, whether it's the UK, Australia, Canada, or throughout Europe. And what this slide shows is very, very clearly that very few people are questioning the fact that digital technologies are going to have a pretty strong impact on the domain. As you see with the numbers here, 96% believe it's at least some extent, and 76% are saying it's disrupting the public sector in some respects. And we find very similar numbers across all sorts of areas, from law enforcement to health and human services to transportation to other areas that government's involved in. And so when we talk about digital transformation, it's important to understand what we're actually talking about. This is not just about putting up a pretty website or a Hollywood storefront and as a front end to a back end system. Digital transformation, in its broadest sense, combines a lot of these really important technologies that are changing the way we work, we shop, we communicate, and how we travel. They include social, everything from Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and YouTube and Periscope and other technologies, which are allowing people to communicate in real time and essentially develop things collaboratively. Mobile technologies, which are seeing the fastest adoption of any technology in human history around the world. There are now more mobile phones than there are toilets in the world, which is an interesting statistic. And in fact, that some of the highest adoption rates, the most rapid adoption rates right now, are among low-income people, especially in developed countries. And so what that's enabling governments to do is actually to shift a lot of services to a digital platform, services that 5 or 10 years ago we might not have thought could be shifted that way because of of issues of not enough, the digital divide and so forth. But that divide is rapidly closing. We have analytics, which again is sophisticated analysis, and we're looking at big data and algorithms and so forth. Cloud computing, which is the storing and processing of information on a network of remote servers, and it's really changing how we use technology and how we pay for it. And we've got cybersecurity, which is such an important issue, of course, and as we're seeing that states are increasingly being targeted by hackers, and so in a digital world, the cybersecurity piece becomes important. Now, tech-savvy organizations no longer are viewing these 5 components as discrete solutions. Rather, what they're doing is they're combining the power, they're harnessing the combined power to target and build intimacy with customers and citizens at scale, and to better understand why clients and customers and citizens buy products and services. So it's the combination of these technologies where you see the real power of digital transformation, and that's what we aim to look at in this study. Now, how did a good part of the study was looking at digital maturity. So we wanted to understand the level of digital maturity of the different agencies. And what we did is we looked at a holistic approach to estimate the maturity. It was based on 20 different questions from our survey, and we grouped them into people, processes, and preparedness. And then we essentially evaluated that, and we looked at this. And what we found was that most NASACT agencies right now fell into the category of developing. They're in the developing stage of digital maturity. About close to a third are what we would call maturing, which is higher than we found globally for government agencies, a slightly higher average than globally, and only about 9% are in the very early stages, which is a lower number also than we found globally. So I think what this tells us is that the NASACT agencies are more mature in some respects than the average government agency when it comes to digital transformation when you look at it across these areas of people, process, and preparedness. One of the major findings that we found was that having a clear digital strategy is an absolute prerequisite to any digital transformation journey. The presence or lack of a clear strategy was by far the biggest predictor of a host of other characteristics, ranging from digital workforce skills to having an innovation culture. I mean, basically, you could predict so many other elements of the digital maturity of an agency by whether they had a strategy or not. And we did, and you see this, that agencies that have a clear, coherent digital strategy, 90% of the maturing agencies did, but only 30% of the early and developing. And it's strongly linked with a number of other elements. So it's really important to have this sort of a strategy that you can execute against across the spectrum of digital. And we also looked at the innovation culture. Digital, as we'll talk about soon, doing digital deliveries is very different than traditional program delivery. And here we also found that maturing organizations said that actually digital is, 90% of them said that digital is having a positive impact on their culture, making them more innovative. And yet in early and developing stage organizations, it was a little bit more even, which meant that they hadn't gotten to that point where they were where digital was starting to actually positively impact their culture. But as organizations move up the maturity curve, that tends to be one of the key, I think, characteristics and advantages of moving towards digital transformation. So with that, let's look a little bit more at readiness for digital right now, and go again a little bit more into the strategy piece, which I think is very important. You see in these numbers something that we found very interesting. Again, having a strategy or not was so important. at 97%, almost all agencies saw digital as an opportunity. But then at the same point, you see that only 40% had a clear and coherent digital strategy, and only 45% increased their investment in digital in the last year. So here you've got a bit of a gap between what agencies see as an opportunity versus what some of the actual actions are, from investment and resourcing it to strategy. And we also see a similar sort of gap when we look at public and private, at least according to survey respondents. And what these numbers show is that we ask them, how do your organization's digital capabilities compare to public sector organizations or private sector organizations? And essentially, you see that a lot of them basically said they're about the same as other public sector organizations. Close to a third said they might be a little bit ahead. But then when we looked at private sector, 73% of the survey respondents said that they were behind the private sector right now, and only 18% said about the same, and actually no respondents said ahead of the private sector. So this, I think, demonstrates one of the challenges, is that there is a gap right now between, I think, what agencies, their ambitions for digital and where they think that they need to be versus where they are and where the resourcing and strategy and so forth are actually happening. So closing that gap becomes a really key element of moving forward from a transformation perspective. Now, with that, why don't I pause for a minute and see if there's any questions that have come in right now, or any comments from Debbie or Christina.
Bill, this is Kenny. Maybe I can just jump in and ask one question. You know, you talked about, the lack of a clear strategy is just, the survey results really show that that's detrimental, and having a clear strategy is really key to transformation. In a government environment, can you kind of explain to us what some of the hurdles are? What are the obstacles for obtaining a clear strategy? So that's question one. And two, is there a difference in what you see in the private sector versus public sector in developing that clear strategy?
Well, I think certainly, one of the hurdles is simply, I think there's several hurdles to it. Number one is, I think some agencies believe that they don't have necessarily the people in-house who have as much knowledge and experience in digital as is needed to actually develop that strategy. I think, secondly, a lot of people just had not necessarily gotten around to it. Some agencies were waiting potentially from the state CIO, for example, or the strategy to come out of that office, and then building it from there. I hear a lot of times the agencies saying, well, we wanted to essentially start moving forward first just on different applications and so forth. And the danger to that is that without a clear strategy, looking at what you want to do as a whole, you're going to end up with disjointed user experiences, and you're probably going to end up spending money you don't need to necessarily spend. And so, but we found, we also surveyed, Kenny, the private sector organizations in a companion survey, and we found the exact same thing, which was the most important element of digital transformation for them was the lack of a strategy, or the presence of a strategy. And so that's what we found very, very similar. We found a little higher percentage of private sector organizations had developed the strategy, and I think there's certainly the competitive element with it, because a lot of millennials and a lot of other people will move on to another company if they go to someone's website or they try to access a mobile app and service and it's not up to the highest levels. So I think that competition between firms was certainly driving a lot of that. But overall, very, very similar findings in terms of how important the presence of a strategy is, both across public and private sector.
That's interesting. I would have guessed that the survey from the public sector or private sector would have demonstrated a much higher degree of a clear strategy, just because of some of the obstacles in the public sector that you mentioned, Bill. You know, who's in charge, the decentralization aspect of government, you know, lends itself to sometimes that we don't have as coordinated and clear a strategy as we wish, although I think the CIOs at the state level have made great strides in improving that. But it's interesting for me to hear that the results between the private and public sector surveys were fairly close in that regard.
Well, it's actually what was close was in both surveys. It was demonstrated how important a strategy is, and that how strategy can be a predictor of a lot of other elements of digital transformation. But we did find that in private sector organizations, a much higher likelihood of actually having a strategy in place.
Okay, gotcha.
If that makes sense. So that does conform to what your inclination would have been.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Great. So why don't I move on a little bit, and we also asked all of you. We said, what are your top objectives for digital right now? And and what we found was not necessarily really surprising. Increasing efficiency, so cost reduction and efficiency, was overwhelmingly the #1 goal for doing digital. Secondly, the second one was creating or accessing information for decision making, along with improving the citizen experience. And those ones kind of clustered up at the top in many respects. We also, what was interesting was that having fundamental transformation of your people and processes and organization, which digital does allow and doesn't enable, was a little bit lower in terms of the priorities right now. And I think that what we also found, though, was that as an organization moved up the digital maturity curve, you see actually fundamental transformation going higher and higher in terms of what their objective is. So basically, organizations would start at saying cost reduction is a key element. As they move up the curve a little bit, improving the citizen experience becomes more and more important. And then as they move up the curve even more, it moves to fundamental transformation. And that's something that we did find across the board with the government agencies in general. You know, not surprising with the NASACT agencies, cost reduction and efficiency were cited a little bit higher than we see with the typical government agencies in terms of what a major goal of it was. And we found there's a number of great case studies out there that we're going to be speaking of with some of the agencies that have done a great job in terms of creating or accessing information for decision making, putting data out there for citizens to build off of, dramatically increasing transparency around spending and other issues. And those, again, came out as objectives at the same time. And that leads to one of the interesting examples, and I think a great example in the States right now, and that's the Ohio checkbook story. It was launched in 2014 by the state treasurer, Josh Mandel, who said, we believe it, and the goal of it was to let citizens see all the expenses incurred by every state agency all the way down to the last penny. And eventually the goal is to move this all the way through to local governments too. And you can see that citizens can see all their expenses incurred, they can see features, it's a user-friendly design. Citizens can compare expenses incurred by multiple agencies. Social media sharing promotes further transparency. I think it's one of the best sites of its kind. And you can see everything from top-earning government contractors, highest paid officials, revenue consumption by departments. Every expense item can be filtered by a number of parameters, including date, expense time, expense type, name of the vendor, program name, type of fund, and name of the agency. And another great thing about the site is that other developers and nonprofit organizations, think tanks, and so forth can take that data and build off it. and they could build off and create other kind of very taxpayer-friendly, user-friendly modems for this. Now we see a number of the NASACT agencies moving down this path and building these sort of elements that give any citizen information to very, very, very detailed spending. But at the same time, it's done in a very user-friendly way. Using with a real focus on user experience and how can just regular people get the kind of information they want to hold government accountable and to get more information on it. So this has been written up a number of times by State Line now since then and won some awards. And I think it's a great example of what digital can enable for government agencies.
Yeah, Bill, while you're transitioning there, this is Kenny. The one good thing about the Ohio checkbook, you mentioned they are moving to include some local government data. I think they've actually achieved that now. They've actually got some school district information up there and some other local government data. So it is truly a one-stop shop.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic, and I think the goal is eventually to have all the local government data that they can on there. And I think they've set a really nice pace for this and a marker for a lot of the other agencies to get to. With that, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Christina Dorff-Huber, who's going to talk about technologies and techniques that are key for digital transformation.
Thanks, Bill. I think first we're going to go to another poll question, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Christina, and the polling question is up now, and you can see that on your screen. The question is, which factor is influencing your organization the most to embrace digital? And the choices are process automation, cost efficiency, client request, reporting or dashboard capability, and then lastly, innovation. So let's give everybody about 30 seconds to answer that. Again, which factor is influencing your organization the most to embrace digital? And we'll give everybody just a little time. While we're waiting, just a reminder, if you do have some questions, you want to ask the questions, you can send those to us at any time during the webinar. Just use the questions tab that's located in the toolbar, type your question in, and send it to us. And as you can tell already, we're trying to mix this one up a little bit today, have some questions come in during the presentation. Just seems to break it up just a little. And the results are coming in now, Christina. I don't know if you can see those, but 43% indicated that process automation is the most influential factor for their organization to embrace digital. 22% cost efficiency. I thought that might actually be a little higher given the nature of our audience. Client request 10%, reporting and dashboard capability 18%, and innovation 6%. But really overwhelmingly, process automation the #1 choice.
Kenny, thank you so much. And here in a moment, I'm going to have an opportunity to show just how consistent that is with some additional survey results we've had. But first, let me start a little bit of a discussion around some of the strategies and the techniques that are being used. Bill shared one with the Ohio checkbook, and I'll give another case example here shortly. But kind of talking about them in groups. For that part of the audience that doesn't even have a digital strategy or isn't sure if they have a strategy yet, maybe understands or knows that there's a bit of a mobile activity going on here or some kind of social network or feedback that's occurring for customers. There may be kind of bits and parts within your organization that are occurring that represent digital, but don't necessarily reflect an understanding of a comprehensive digital strategy in the way that that's going to be approached. So one component around kind of that strategy and technique that we see a lot of commercial organizations engage in, and some state, local, and certainly the federal government, has been this concept of a digital readiness assessment to really fully understand, from security to process to people to technology, what's the readiness for digital across a number of different areas. And some of those areas are ones that we just heard articulated around, like process automation and analytics or mobile. Do you have the technology infrastructure that'll help it? Do you have the right skills in place that'll help it? And so it allows you to kind of quickly assess where you may find some gaps in terms of being ready. And as you're building that strategy, then it'll help you support how to fill those gaps. So that's one thing that we see organizations engaging in. And then as part of that strategy, when they are actually doing the execution, the implementation, there's a number of things that are going on. Mobile strategies are becoming more and more prevalent for government, and we're starting to see more of those being used also in the finance and the accounting space as it relates to providing information to your customers, in which often case your customers will be necessarily other agencies or vendors and other areas, as well as in revenue departments, for instance, even though that's not necessarily this cohort completely, mobile strategies that would allow them to check on the status of tax returns, etc. And so the mobile strategy is becoming more and more prevalent just because people are walking around in essence with a computer in their hand, and so it gives them an opportunity to access information. I've had cabinet secretaries say it'd be great if I could see my budget and see cost versus actuals and see exactly where I am from an accounting perspective on a dashboard if I am not in front of my computer and I could pull up some information on my PDA. And so those are the types of thinking and requests that we're starting to see more and more. Cloud solutions are becoming more and more prevalent as we're starting to see not only a shift in the infrastructure as well as the skills and the availability, but also just the comprehensive nature in terms of what's being made available for not only the commercial sector, but also the private sector. And this concept of private clouds and shared clouds within government, or as many of you have probably heard, are becoming more and more prevalent. And as the security of those are becoming tighter, an appreciation for what the security is able to provide is something that more organizations are beginning to look at, as it helps to reduce the cost of year-over-year maintenance and operations, as well as provide a community and a cohort that allows you to continue to move forward with newer technologies and newer capabilities and functionality at a more rapid rate than traditional legacy systems. The social networks and web analytics is an area that is quite prevalent. It's generally viewed as kind of the second highest area of interest, and the use of that and then portraying that information and then using that information, whether it's for predictive analytics or for beginning to help with forecasting with budgets, or beginning to understand where there may be fraud and abuse that is occurring. All of those areas are ones that are techniques and tools that we're beginning to see more and more within government. And no longer are you having to necessarily do your fraud and analytics research in a vacuum, and you're able to tap into broader social networks and web analytics that will allow you to bring in more information and then kind of improve your accuracy rate. The social networks for customer feedback is a very interesting area, and it's one that some states and localities have embraced and others have still kind of hesitated to embrace, whether it's using Twitter or whether it's using Facebook pages. We see some agencies using some of those in order to do some very interesting analytics, but we're also seeing them in a way to gain quick information and quick feedback to certain areas of need. And from the city of New York considering using Twitter in order to begin to identify different ways that there might be potholes or issues on the street, to other kind of feedback mechanisms. These social networks are starting to be embraced more by government, in part because they're so embraced by society. And then the final one I want to mention, which is fun, is this whole concept of apathons. Now, this can present a bit of a challenge in state procurement and local government procurement components, but an apathon, or a kind of similar, sometimes they are referred to as hackathons, but in this case I'll use apathon, is this opportunity to kind of test a proof of concept or get an idea out there very quickly, and for a limited amount of funds. And so you're starting to see this opportunity for states to say, hey, we're thinking about this and we need a concept, and you're going to get people that will bid on doing some of this and then present you with this, and it's a competition, and then it gives you an opportunity to choose from some of the best and brightest in the country that are getting together to think about this problem statement that you have as it relates to helping provide a service or a solution to your constituency. in a very cost-effective way. And we're starting to see more and more of that occur. The federal government's been using it, and commercial practice is definitely really pushing forward with some of those concepts. So, Bill, let's kind of switch to the next page, and we can have a bit more of a conversation that kind of further extends, the drivers and where some of these digital technologies are playing out. So this group represented that about 43%, if I recall correctly from the feedback, said that process automation was a key driver, and certainly as it relates to the perception of individuals on which one is going to best help them achieve their key priorities, process automation obviously ranked very, very high. It was considered to be a major enabler, and and really probably a first step. Once you then automate the processes, that gives you data that allows you to do some very interesting analytics, and it gives you not only your internal data, but it also then allows you to tap in and bring to bear against that internal data, external data that you can look at and begin to do some areas of prediction, whether it be predictive analytics in terms of how people are going to behave, or whether it might be around analytics and just better understanding forecasting techniques that you might want to understand, or vendor expectations. 33% said mobile, which was interesting. I think in particular as it relates to the cohort here, in terms of kind of who the customer base is, outside of your vendor community and your business relationship, you may not have as high of a need for kind of that mobile interaction as much as you do process automation and analytics, which is very important in terms of your day-to-day operations. And so, for that reason, where other organizations may have indicated that mobile may be higher, for this cohort at this time, that may not be as high of a priority in terms of reaching your needs. Only 15% indicated cloud, and again, I think part of that is the maturity and the acceptance of cloud within the public sector environment, and in particularly in areas that are sensitive, such as finance or some of the HR areas. I think we'll see over time more of that adoption as people become more comfortable with that in the government sector, and that's very similar to social media. And again, also with the cohort that we're working with and the group that indicated from the NASACT survey, social media is not a key driver. It doesn't necessarily enable your priorities or your processes as much as these other areas do. So, along the continuum of kind of financial activities, which ones, were viewed, at least from the survey respondents, in terms of the most impacted versus the least impacted? And, on the most impacted, it was, around those areas that had kind of external components to, revenue collection, around auditing, which Debbie's going to share a bit more with you here, and accounting. And the use of the process automation is definitely factored into there. The use of the analytics is a component part. And then on the continuum, this concept of fund investment and fund allocation, they just generally at this time found those to be, less impacted in terms of the finance activities that would both benefit from and kind of embrace the digital technologies. So, with this concept of revenue collection and revenue being one of the most impacted, I want to share a little bit of a case study with you in terms of where that is and kind of how predictive analytics supported the state of New York. State of New York had an opportunity to, and they realized that they really needed to continue to seek out fraud and abuse, and in particular in tax filing. And so what they said is that they wanted to design a way to kind of fight fraud in tax returns, and in particular kind of with private income tax returns. And so they wanted to adopt the use of predictive analytics in order to help detect invalid returns and or suspicious returns. So they might have been valid but not necessarily representing the right numbers, or they may have been completely invalid. And so what they were able to do is apply different analytics capabilities to information, digital information that was coming in, and match it against databases to look for anomalies such as incorrect mailing addresses, stolen identities, suspicious IP addresses, and really look at different factors that all represented not only the return itself, but other additional information that was outside of the return that it could be matched against in a digital world. And the net result of that was really significant, and the commissioner really felt that they had an opportunity, that they had really successfully taken a step towards fraud, and through the communications of that begins to help not only deter it, but also get ahead of it, and continuing to invest in this kind of technology and extending this not only to their current focus, but other areas within state government was going to allow them to get ahead of the technology, or use that technology in order to be both faster and more accurate in terms of their tax and finance capabilities. Any questions on the tools and technologies before I turn it back to Bill? And another poll question.
Christina, this is Kenny. Just you talked about social networks for customer feedback. Are there any kind of emerging trends that you're seeing there, consistent trends, if you will? And if there are, what are they? Are more governments starting to use Twitter? What are you guys seeing in that area?
Bill, I've heard you give a pretty interesting story on that, and I just want to make sure I've got the right reference. We're definitely starting to see more of it. I've seen more of it overseas than I have necessarily in the U.S. So, Bill, I'm trying to think if there's any kind of recent examples you can say in the U.S. side.
Sure. It's funny, on the social media. I wrote a book about this over a decade ago called Gov 2.0. Which played off Web 2.0, which is the use of social media. We actually then thought that we would see, a much more rapid adoption of social and those tools with government agencies. We haven't seen most government agencies. They have Twitter handles. There's a lot of people in government who are tweeting a lot and who are interacting with citizens. I mean, there's Cory Booker, the senator, who's then former mayor of Newark, who's famous for basically using Twitter almost as his kind of CRM system. And as people would tweet to him, well, we've got a problem in this house here, this is happening, he kind of go around in his car with his folks and go around and try to fix those things. And so it's a way of actually getting much closer to individuals. But what we're seeing instead is, I think a lot of governments are really doing some very, very interesting things around crowdsourcing, using basically different collaboration tools to crowdsource from citizens. Some examples of that would be in the city of Boston. They have something called Citizens Connect, and essentially you see a pothole, you see graffiti, and right. All you need to do is you take a picture of it and from the app, and it goes right into the city's public works system, and about 20% of all the service orders now are from citizens themselves. So we're seeing, I think, a lot of apps that are enabling that sort of citizen to government interactions, but I would say a movement more towards the apps as opposed to just in general social media. And we're seeing the prizes and challenges that Christina spoke about. But Christina, the other thing that was struck about your New York example, about a little over about 15 years ago, I actually used to work in one of the NASACT agencies, the Texas Controller's Office, and way back then we were doing a lot of interesting things using neural networks and others to try to identify tax fraud and other areas. And so people say, well, what's new today? Well, the technologies have gotten so much better than they were then, and also the ability to access a lot of data from the private sector and a lot of kind of data that's out there in an unstructured way and put it together in a way is much better than it ever was before. That's why analytics becomes so important. But what we're also finding in essentially a lot of tax revenue agencies and so forth is that the criminals are getting much better too. And so it's this kind of war, because you're basically, they can go and there's actually within the dark web and within the kind of the cyber threat market, there's companies that provide CRM systems for them, that provide all sorts of malware tools and so forth and so on. And so governments have to keep on getting better and better to address that, because their costs, their chances of getting caught are oftentimes fairly low. But that's again where getting better and better analytics is going to be increasingly important in the future.
Christina, it's Debbie. Just while we're paused here a minute and talking about some of the points you brought forward, I just wanted to make a point on your enablers chart. It was really interesting conversation regarding efficiency and automation as being, process automation as being the top requirement. Yeah, on this chart here that you can see in front of you now, as being by far the most important requirement as people see it. The point I really wanted to make is what I'm seeing happening with a lot of folks who are starting to implement this digital transformation is that the focus really is there. But I'd really encourage you to look down the stack a little bit more, down to cloud and mobile particularly, because as you develop capabilities to automate your processes, if you're not thinking about those things from the ground up, they're very difficult to overlay later from a technical perspective. So you really need to think about, do you want to be taking advantage of cloud-based technologies and software as a service or even platform as a service? You need to think about those parts of your strategy really before you embark on a big process automation upgrade, because they'll be very difficult to incorporate at a later stage if you don't think about them up front.
Absolutely. Great point, Debbie. And if there are no questions that have come in yet, we'll go to some of the barriers that you've identified and how to address some of those barriers. Kenny, are we all set to go forward?
Bill, there is one question about mobile. It's one of the strategies that you've identified, and you're right. I mean, everybody has a mini computer in their hand nowadays. What are you seeing in terms of mobile strategies in the public sector? Are you seeing any emerging trends there?
Yeah, Kenny, I just finished a book that'll come out in a couple months on digital transformation. So looked at a lot of cases and a lot of really interesting case studies with mobile. And I want to echo what Debbie says, but just how important it is, because that's essentially the devices. That's where most people are going to interact with government, already, and certainly more so in the future, from the highest income to the lowest income people very often. And let me give you a story. And the key part about why what Debbie said is so important, doing a mobile service is radically different than building something that's going to be on a desktop, because you have much less space to look at it. It has to be very intuitive, very user-friendly. It can't have all sorts of steps and so forth, or that actually disadvantages people, and they will move off it. And so you have to go about mobile in a way where you're actually understanding how will real users interact with this. And so a great example of this over the years is what banks have done, right, around checks, where you can basically just take a picture of the check with your mobile device, you press upload, and it deposits it in the bank. And that's made things much easier. I know for myself, I probably do 98% of all of my banking from a mobile perspective right now, because they've created a lot of very user-friendly ways of doing so. And so in one case, working with an agency in Texas, what they wanted to do was try to figure out how to start putting some of their integrated eligibility functions on mobile. Now, if you were looking at that a number of years ago, you might have said, okay, we're going to take all of the capabilities and put it on mobile. Now, that might have been a multi-year process that was very expensive, took a long time, and so forth. But instead, they adopted a very different approach, which is that we're going to find the highest priority ones, the ones that will get the best bang for the buck. And we're going to do that by actually not guessing ourselves, but going out and talking to real users, real people. So what we did was we went out to service centers throughout the state, where people who are applying for TANF and other benefits were at, and just started asking them, you know, why are you actually here in the service center? What services could you use? What are the biggest pain points for you right now? And what it turned out was that actually uploading documents, eligibility documents, was difficult because many of them they didn't have fax machines, might not have had personal computers and scanners in their homes. But you know what most of them did have was they had mobile devices, and as our folks who were there, we could watch them, and they're on mobile devices while they're in line. And so one of the first mobile apps that was created here was a simple one, which is simply doing what banks can do and allowing people to upload those eligibility documents on a mobile device by taking pictures of it. And lo and behold, within just a few months, that became the most popular way of uploading documents. And these are for, you know, these are mostly low-income individuals. And I think what it also shows is that, you know, you have to go to actual users and see how they're actually interacting with government and what's going to work, rather than sitting in a conference room or something trying to work that through. Because oftentimes they're going to surprise you. It's going to surprise you. So mobile is happening. We see examples, really, really interesting examples every day in government. I think it's the fastest growing area probably of digital government that I've seen today. Christina, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, the one that I would add, you know, kind of specific in the finance environment that is providing for vendors in particular, or other business partners that you have, providing mobile applications that allow them to check where invoices are in the process, and which helps reduce a number of call-ins and inconsistent answers, and kind of extends the ability for them, if something's, you know, messed up in that process, allows them to either take a picture or do something similar to what Bill was saying in terms of uploading information that can then go into the automated process. And so there's increasing ways of extending the reach and helping reduce certain cycle times and reducing kind of manual efforts that allow the worker, the individual within state government, to focus on other areas of need, as opposed to these kind of, you know, manual automations or responding to questions that can be enabled in that way. And that's just one way that mobile is helping provide that information.
Great, thanks, Christina. So let's move to the next area, which is actually launching digital services, and what are some of the challenges and barriers to that, and some ideas for overcoming those barriers. And that leads us to the next polling question. And Kenny, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Bill. You know, we've been talking about barriers a little bit already. Let's get your feedback. You know, based on your organization's experience, what do you see as the biggest barrier in moving to digital? Is it agency-specific rules and regulations? Or perhaps it's flexibility, appropriate talent, perhaps cost, or lastly, management support? So you have 5 choices there. Again, what is the biggest barrier for you in your organization in moving to digital? So again, we'll give everybody about 30 seconds to weigh in on this question. Then we'll post the results, and then we'll move forward. Again, as a reminder, thank you, by the way, for the questions that have been coming in. If you do have questions, you can send those to us, and we'll bring those out at the appropriate time. Simply use the questions tab located in the toolbar. Just type your question and send it to us, and we'll get that out to our presenters today. And the results coming up now, Bill. Agency-specific rules and regulations, 15% indicated that that's the biggest barrier for their own organization. Flexibility, only 9%. Appropriate talent, 13%. By far the biggest, 50% indicated cost is the biggest barrier to their organization, followed 13% management support. So pretty wide disparity here, Bill. Cost weighing in heavily.
Yeah, and if we go to the next slide, you'll see that when we asked this writ large to members, it was pretty similar. Insufficient funding, which is the other side of cost, being the #1 barrier, too many competing priorities, and then security concerns with privacy concerns kind of clustered along those lines. Some of the other areas that you would, insufficient technical skills, lack of overall strategy were down a little bit further overall there. And so certainly the funding issue is an important one. If you look at the trajectory of digital government, you know, we all, I think a number of us remember back in the 90s and the e-gov era. You know, back then, actually, when I was at the controller's office, we had a big initiative called e-Texas, which was a huge initiative to during the .com era, basically to enable Texas government to .com it, essentially, to e-enable it in all sorts of ways. And then what happened was the big recession came, and a lot of what governments had been doing, getting ready for that, were put on hold for a number of years because of cost. The one thing I'd say about insufficient funding and so forth is that the wonderful thing about digital in many respects is it's much less expensive at doing many of these things because of some of the technologies that Christina talked about and Debbie mentioned, cloud computing, software as a service, mobile, and so forth. You know, you can actually start up a business right now and get it going. You know, a technology-oriented business for about $5,000 to $10,000 is what people say, compared to potentially millions during the .com era, because you don't have to actually have all that infrastructure and create it all yourself. And there's a lot of very lightweight ways, I think, to do digital. Christina talked about hackathons. There's a lot of other things. So I think some of the cost issue certainly is an issue, but I think it's not really an excuse not to get going, because there's a lot that you can do. There's cost reductions you can make, and it's also what digital can now enable you to do is increase productivity, increase efficiency, and so forth. And by actually taking some of the cost out of the common infrastructure, technology infrastructure and maintenance and those sort of services, you know, using techniques like cloud computing, you can actually get some of those costs down and put that money into these more productivity enhancing digital applications. And I think that's a key element here, because what we found over the last 15, 20 years is that government was not able to reap the kind of productivity enhancements from digital technologies in the same way that the private sector was, and some of it was around where that money is invested, and a lot of the money being kind of locked up in infrastructure maintenance and a lot of legacy systems. And so moving out of that becomes really, really important, and you can leverage some of the cost savings from doing so to invest in these productivity enhancing technologies. So as Christina mentioned, security is certainly viewed as a barrier right now to cloud and social media adoption, in some cases digital adoption in general. Only 15% of respondents consider cloud technology as a major enabler for their priorities, which would be much lower than you would see in the private sector, significantly lower. But I think increasingly we are seeing that cloud computing can both reduce costs and provide security. A good example of this, there's a number of examples. One of them is with the Office of Controller of the Currency, which migrated to a cloud-based vulnerability assessment system. And their cost per scan fell significantly, and the detection of vulnerabilities actually went up by 12%, improving overall security. And then when you look at social media, this is again from my old employer, the Texas Controller's Office. The Unclaimed Property Division was recognized for its successful social media campaign, and they actually were able to generate unclaimed property claims amounting to over $5 million by using social media strategically and effectively. And there's a lot of other good examples with this. So these are areas that we would encourage people to look at more closely and to give a second look at. Now, also challenges for digital transformation. We asked, how challenging is it for your organization to manage the transition in these areas around culture, workforce, procurement, and leadership. Because these are the areas that we hear about repeatedly, how difficult it is. And as you see, within each of these areas, the majority of respondents have said that they're either highly challenging or highly challenging. From culture to workforce to procurement and leadership. And we do hear this a lot, but this is also an area where a number of government agencies around the country and around the world are making really, really big strides in actually overcoming those challenges. And these are some of the strategies that we've seen government agencies actually doing to try to overcome those. And so if we start off with the talent strategies, how do you compete against the private sector for people who are good web developers, who have user experience skills, who are service architects, who are cybersecurity experts, and so forth? What we hear is very, very difficult to either recruit them, or if we bring them in, to actually retain them. And how do we get our workforce digitally skilled up? And there are some good examples of this within I think the financial management community in general and writ large. One of the examples I think that's really strong is the Consumer Finance Protection Agency, which was started up after the recession. What they were able to do is they started up as a new agency. They didn't have a lot of the legacy systems, a lot of the legacy barriers, and they wanted to basically be a digital-first agency from the beginning. And they absolutely committed to having top-notch technology staff on board. They wanted to recruit the best and brightest in government and in the private sector to work within the agency. And they soon discovered that the hiring processes were hurting them. It was taking way too long, where they couldn't compete effectively. And also that just recruiting from government websites like USA Jobs and so forth wasn't working very well. So what they did was they actually went out to, first of all, they reduced the hiring process dramatically. They changed the job descriptions, which is important. As they pointed out, that if you're a great web developer and so forth, you're not going to necessarily respond to some of the very traditional sounding job descriptions you find in government. So they actually changed the job descriptions for almost all the technology jobs. They made them more interesting, more similar to what they would have seen in the private sector or startups. And they also found out that they started going to a lot of the technology forums and other websites for actually recruiting, where people would actually recruit developers as opposed to just relying on government websites. They also did some other interesting things. They found that a lot of developers, before they join an organization, they go on the back end and they look at the code, the website code of the organizations. They want to see how good it is and how skilled it is. So what they actually did was they hid. They put within there a lot of the job openings and everything. Is a very clever way of reaching some of those developers. And they were very successful in doing that. Another federal agency called 18F that a lot of it was launched after healthcare.gov went awry, has been able to recruit over 150 top technologists from Silicon Valley, from Boston, from all over to come work for them. And one of the things that they will say is that you have to give these technologists the best tools when they go in there. You can't hire them and then they have archaic 1990s level tools. And so basically they want to make sure that their environment is as technologically savvy as an environment in the private sector. And then they believe that because of the mission of government and the important things government does, that they can outcompete a lot of the private companies for that. One other digital talent example I'd like to give is, no matter how well you do recruiting others and engaging the wider technology community, you're still going to have to also reskill a lot of your workforce who might not be that knowledgeable about these new technologies, or even some of your technology folks who have COBOL programming skills and so forth. And so another agency we looked at in the UK actually created a digital academy. And what the digital academy did was that they tried to, in 6-week sessions, you'd go through this academy, and basically after a couple of weeks you decide what area you wanted to focus on, if you wanted to go into service architecture, or if you wanted to go into user experience, or to be a developer. And you would get trained in that, just a regular employee, and after 6 weeks you would graduate from the digital academy, and then you would become kind of a plumber's mate for someone with more expertise, who you would shadow for 6 months and learn in an apprentice way. You would learn some of those skills. Now, you might not at the end of this be able to be the best person in the world, but you can be pretty good in these areas. And what they're trying to do is literally reskill 20% or more of their overall workforce, because they believe in their organizations today everyone needs to have some digital skills, and they put 1,000 people through those digital academies in the space of just a year, and they're aiming for another 9,000 this year. So there's a lot of interesting tools and techniques and strategies that governments are successfully using right now to overcome some of those talent issues, both through hiring, but also through reskilling. And the one last one I would point out was engaging the broader technology ecosystem, whether it's through prizes and challenges, hackathons, through contracting, through a variety of vehicles. There's ways for governments to bring in the best and brightest from the technology sector to help with your actual mission. If we look at the next slide, it looks at the elements of a digital mindset. Now, when we talk about digital mindset, it's more than technology implementation. Digital mindset requires seeing old problems and old processes through new eyes. It's a different way of thinking about stakeholders, a different way of launching products and services, a different way of working. People with a digital mindset tend to believe very, very strongly in openness in government and transparency, and a singular kind of focus on the user, and agile development as opposed to waterfall sort of models. And right now, in the survey, we found that in many cases that's an area that's lacking right now. That's in most government agencies in general. And one of the areas that we found like a bit of a gap was that many organizations have said that they believe strongly in focusing on citizen demand. Citizen demand is helping to drive digital transformation, but only 11% of organizations with that as one of their goals, improving citizen experience and engagement as a digital objective, are actually involving citizens in co-creating digital services. And what we found is that, again, and if you want to developing really, really user-friendly digital services that are focused around the pain points of users and around their life events, the only way you can do those well is by actually involving real users and testing against real users over and over, and iterating until you get that better in version 1, version 2.0, version 3.0. And that's how almost all mobile apps and digital products are delivered right now in our society, but we're finding that there's still a bit of a lag in doing that in government today. And when you look at agile development, essentially, which is a very different approach towards technology development than traditional waterfall model, that agile development is something that a lot of the agencies have said is very important and should be adopted, but at the same time we're not seeing actually a lot of experimentation and adoption of that. And here you see some of the differences between auditors and controllers in that respect. But what we found in general was that the understanding that government needs to do more of this, but still not a lot of actually movement in that direction. I do think that that is beginning to change. We're seeing this in the federal government. The Obama administration has been a very, very strong proponent of this through their U.S. Digital Services and their 18F programs. And we're starting to see this more and more at the state level, too, where some states are actually saying this is how we're going to be doing technology implementations in the future. We're going to move towards a different model, a more modular model of technology implementation. But I think we're still in the relatively early stages of that. And that leads us to procurement. Today, IT procurement and government is a pretty heavily documented and policy-driven process. And what we found was that we asked all of you, what are the biggest obstacles to better procurement practices? Rules and regulations and lack of flexibility were by far the two biggest obstacles cited. And we saw that also from the global perspective. But then we say ways in which procurement needs to change, and you see agile development, less control from the center, modular development, and so forth. And so, so again, agile becoming one of those where it's recognized that that's a very, very important thing in agile and doing agile contracting, but very little actually in practice today. Again, that's something I think we are seeing a change in. In the procurement community, there's not a lot of experience or expertise in general in the public sector in doing agile contracting. At the federal level, they're trying to change that. The White House and the U.S. Digital Services creating a cadre of agile digital, essentially, procurement officers who will get a certain amount of training over a period of time, and then they will be basically get this a recognition that they have the expertise in this area in terms of doing agile development. And so it's very important as we get more and more people who are familiar with how to actually do this in the public sector, the procurement mechanisms need to follow that very, very closely. But right now, I think we see a lot of tension between the two. But there's a variety of strategies and tools that can be used in that respect. They're amending the RFP process to encourage early engagement and discussions with vendors, would give them a much better idea of what an agency is looking for, breaking out the procurement process and starting with a short concept paper, doing things like bake-offs, essentially between various firms. And so we're seeing a lot of these innovative contracting techniques start to happen at the federal level, somewhat at the city level, and I think we're going to see more and more also at the state level going forward. And that brings us to, I think, another really good case study here, and that's the Texas Comptroller's Office, which we've talked a little bit about before. But they were trying to create a new online procurement system, Texas Smart Buy 2.0. And what they did there was they really put the users at the heart of service design. And the goal was really to create a system that was as user-friendly as Amazon was. That was what was stated from VJ George, who was then the Chief Technology Officer for the office. So they wanted to mirror the Amazon shopping experience. In order to do that, rather than design it, again in a glass tower, what they did was they went out and they got a lot of comments and so forth, feedback from actual users about what wasn't working today, what would they like to do. They did a lot of that sort of user-based design, design thinking around it, and they improved the user experience and security. They're able to reduce maintenance costs by about 72%, or $11.5 million annually, and they moved the system to a cloud-based solution that provided user-friendly search and order management functions that was pretty similar to what we would see in the retail industry best practices. And again, the reason I think why this was so successful was because it was all focused around the individual users and how to deal with their pain points and increase their take-up rates and make it easier for them to interact with the online procurement system. Now, if we look at strategies and tools, again, for procurement here and digital procurement. This is, again, digital is just done differently in many respects, and procurement is an area that's no different. Some procurement strategies are going to have to change. Some of the things that we've seen that have been interesting have been these things called bake-offs, which are an alternative to big multi-year awards, and they're smaller awards to teams from different contractors, and every 6 months they're reevaluated. The number of teams from each one is adjusted based on performance. There's a number of agencies that have tried that. Prizes and challenges. There's more than 600 of these that have been done at the federal level in the last 7 years right now. And what they do is they help you engage a diverse and often unexpected group of problem solvers, and you get startups involved and others. And the better yet, you really only pay for results, and you can ensure that there are incentives for all the competitors rather than just the winners in doing these prizes and challenges. And increasingly, we're seeing states and cities doing prizes and challenges too as an alternative to traditional procurement. A few other things I think that are important. It is important to train procurement officers in digital acquisition. How is it different than traditional procurement? You want to tap into some of the private sector expertise in this area. I know the state of California right now is trying to move in this direction, and they've been doing a lot of looking into what are the best practices in the private sector and technology industry in doing agile contracting. And then the last thing I would mention here was the prototypes. Instead of investing in every new technology, you can issue contracts for a number of small, inexpensive prototypes that can be built and evaluated more quickly. I would just leave it with this thought that like changing procurement strategies and reforming them and modernizing them in many respects is a key element of moving forward in digital transformation. And with that, why don't I pause for a few minutes? And Christina and Debbie, do you have anything to add? Or Kenny, do you have any comments to add?
I don't at this time, Bill. I think you've covered a lot of the key points up to this stage.
Yeah, Bill, this is Kenny. I think in the interest of time, we'll just wait till we get to Q&A. I've got a couple other questions that have come in, but maybe we'll get to those at the end.
Okay, that sounds great. So let me just end my portion of this before I turn it over to Debbie to talk about 6 key questions to consider in order to accelerate your digital transformation. The first one we've emphasized a number of times, and that's having a clear and coherent strategy. You need a roadmap that addresses key elements of digital transformation. The roadmap should look at culture, leadership, workforce, and procurement. And it needs to be accompanied by, you need a mechanism to track and measure the progress against the goals. Secondly, the key tenet is to start with the user. Yet our survey suggests that many agencies are not engaging citizens in service design and may lack user-centered design skills in their workforces. So exploring these kind of user-centric agile development methodologies could be helpful, and really, really focusing on the user. Third is that to ask the question, are we maximizing the potential of all available digital technologies to achieve our agency's mission? As we saw in some of the survey slides, that some of the technologies like cloud computing, social media, and so forth were not being used to a great extent by the agencies. And agencies can gain from diversifying their technology portfolio to target different mission goals. So if you really want to get closer to the customers, then putting more time and attention into your social media strategy is going to be very important. Number 4 is, what have you done to strengthen the innovation and collaboration culture of our organization? To answer, as organizations mature digitally, they learn to increasingly employ digital technologies to reinforce this culture of innovation. Even designing space and time for groups to collaborate with each other, to work on solutions and ideas could go a long way in building this culture of innovation. Third, you want to look at your talent pool. What does it look like today, and where are the skills coming from? Where do we need in the future? Debbie's going to talk about some things in the audit of the future involving cognitive technologies and so forth. Where do you get the people with those skills, and do you have a plan to do so, where you pinpoint what workforce capabilities you need and how you're going to secure them. Lastly, getting again to procurement, the survey shows that the big agencies want, what the big changes that are wanted in the procurement process: agile development, less restrictive terms and conditions, more decentralized model. And any procurement reform that agencies undertake should certainly consider these issues. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Debbie Sills, my colleague, to talk about the audit of the future.
Thanks very much, Bill, and thank you all for your continued attention. I know it's a long time to listen to us talking at you, so hopefully you're enjoying the presentation, and I will make my piece brief and open it up for questions. The discussion here on the audit of the future is somewhat of a hypothetical case study, if you like. Christina and Bill have given you some real case studies from the public sector. What I've been engaged in over the last about 6 months is working with one of the world's leading audit firms, and I'll leave you to determine who you think that might be, to help them to reimagine the future of audit. Now, you know, having done a lot of transformation already in the audit practice and in the way that audits are approached and the methodologies behind audits, it really is getting to the point, as Bill said earlier, in terms of, you know, what's really driving people to adopt digital. It's getting to the point of maturity where transformation is becoming the key goal. And I would say not transformation just for transformation's sake, but this industry is being transformed. You know, whether the auditors and the financial analysts in the business wish for it to occur or not, it is being transformed by virtue of the available technologies. So it really is becoming a transformation imperative more than a choice to transform. And I think we're going to see that happen in a lot of our businesses. So, Bill, if you just flip forward one chart for me, let's just jump in and do this final polling question, by the looks of things, before we get into the meat of this discussion. So, Kenny, should I pass it over to you for this?
Yeah, that sounds great, Debbie. Thank you. So let's bring up the polling question, and Debbie mentioned this is the last one. Really important for you individuals to answer the questions. It's our way of tracking your attendance. As we're getting ready to, Debbie's going to talk about auditing. This question goes, which financial activity do you feel has the most opportunity to be impacted by digital? Revenue collection being the first possible answer. Second, auditing, which Debbie's getting ready to discuss. Third, cost management. Fourth, which Bill just talked about a little bit, procurement. And then lastly, the fifth choice is not sure. So again, those are your 5 choices. Which has the most opportunity to be impacted by digital? We'll give everyone about 30 seconds to respond to that, and then we'll look at the results.
Leading into this, Kenny, can I make a plug for auditing?
Absolutely. I try to put a little emphasis on that. All right, results coming up now. Looking at these, 35% answered revenue collection, the #1 choice, revenue collection. Auditing, 24%, second choice. Cost management, 22%. Procurement, 10%, and also not sure at 10%. So, Debbie, revenue collection, the #1 choice here.
Okay, thanks, Kenny. So by the end, we should do this poll again at the end of my little presentation and see if we
That's right. See if you can convince them.
Okay, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about auditing and what's going on in the world of auditing. This is typically coming from a commercial point of view, but I imagine that all of the things that our commercial audit firms and audit processes and engagements are looking at are just as pertinent to you. What I'm going to talk about is, what we're thinking of as a technology-led audit transformation. And as I indicated before the polling question, this is not a choice for transformation necessarily. I think a lot of auditors out there are quite comfortable with the way things are going on in the world of audit, and indeed the research that we do as a firm indicates that our clients and CFOs around the country really value the audit process as it is today. But those of you who are in this world will also know that we have been doing audits for in the same way for the last 50 or more years. Simply the way that we approach an audit hasn't changed very much. The implementation of technology in the audit practice or in the audit area is also complicated, as you can imagine. So while there is great promise that technology brings to automate a lot of the functions that auditors do today, there also is a real necessary balance between what technology can provide to the auditor and to the audit process, and how to make sure that we are retaining that professional judgment that is so important in the audit, so that we're not over-automating, if you like, that we're still keeping the auditors and the focus of the individuals who are really considering and looking at all of the data and the information that comes out of the audit to apply that professional judgment to make sure that they're really addressing those areas of high risk. So it is a real balancing act, and something that has been that's been on top of mind as we've looked at this. We've really sort of started out with our audit professionals talking about a number of key technologies, and I'm going to walk through them with you the way that we have walked through them with the auditors, and give you some insight into how they see the future in these areas. So I've always started with them, as we've talked about this, with mobile. And the primary reason is that we all understand mobile. We all have our PDAs, we're all checking our schedules, our tasks, our Facebook. We're very good at time slicing around that and receiving all of our data in that format. So all of our audit professionals understand mobile and can start to think about how mobile can be integrated into the process of the audit and what's important from a mobile perspective. What we hear from our auditors particularly is there's a number of key areas where mobile has a real role to play. One very interesting app that we've put out for our auditors is around inventory and inventory counting. So auditors are typically in their inventory warehouse with clipboards and pens and counting inventory, looking at the controls around inventory and so forth, whereas the mobile device lends itself very easily to reading the RFIDs, making sure that that process is automated, and pulling that data directly back into the appropriate spreadsheets and working papers so auditors can consider the results very quickly. The mobile capability of this, though, also acts as a very great collaboration device with people who are in the office or in the central location, and those who are out in the field doing inventory counting. And that type of social collaboration between reviewers of material or questions that could be asked and answered while people are on site is creating a substantial amount of efficiency in this area. That's just one example of how mobile is being used to transform the audit process. Another one that our auditors are particularly interested in is looking at how to manage their tasks. One thing I've learned working with auditors is that there's not an auditor that I have met so far that doesn't have a very well-structured and lengthy task list. They manage them in lots of different ways through some technology, task management systems like that you find on your cell phone or in your Outlook, or on pieces of paper where they cross them off and reprioritize them on a regular basis. But that ability to integrate those tasks in a much more automated way so that the things that are most important are alerted on a mobile device, that tasks are updated automagically, as we say, as the audit proceeds and things become more or less important. And that is one of the key uses of mobile in this environment today. So that's a warm-up, if you like, exercise in terms of looking at what that technology might look like. The next thing gets a little bit more complicated. We start thinking about smart workflow. And so smart workflow, which is still on the previous chart, is also something that our auditors are really interested in. One of the things that happens in an audit environment, which I'm sure you're aware of, is that depending upon the findings, the workflow and the project plan, if you like, the tasks that have to be completed to complete the audit change. So as a finding occurs or as a risk becomes more prevalent based on data that's been gathered and analyzed, then there may be new tasks, there may be different workflows, there may be a change in emphasis on the audit. So that ability to smartly use workflow to reallocate and balance workload across the audit team is one of the most critical elements for auditors, particularly as you get to the end of the process where there's typically a lot of work to do and very little time to do it. That ability to be able to reassign the work and reset the workflow to get those really important tasks through the system quickly is very, very important. So smart workflow has become an increasing focus for our audit firm as well. So let's move forward to the next chart and now we get down into some more meaty technology areas. Analytics. As you all are aware, the way that audits have been done in the past and still are done today is based on a sampling methodology. So risks are prioritized, identified, and then transactions or accounts or other elements are sampled in order to determine whether there are risks or issues that need to be addressed. So the ability of new technologies to process massive amounts of data and look for anomalies or differences in the data really changes the game for audit. So now the requirement to sample can simply go away. You can look at all the data all the time in a continuous audit fashion to be able to find issues, identify anomalies, investigate those anomalies on a near real-time basis. Analytics has a game-changing element to it for the way that audits are conducted and will be conducted in the future, and it's an area where there's been some initial very strong applications built today that pull things like, for example, journal entry databases into massive analytics engines and really drive those things. The other way that analytics is being used is to do comparisons across a broad amount of data, whether it be industry data, data for similar types or sizes of firms, and look at where your firm or your organization has an outlying or a difference, a material difference in the way that financials are being reported to others, which will help guide an investigation or the evidence gathering around the audit. So there's lots of opportunities for analytics, and we're really at our infancy in the audit space in this area, but it has a major transformational impact on the audit, and we can expect to see a lot more in the future. Now, while artificial intelligence sounds very futuristic, the fact is that that's one of the things that we're doing today. And of all of the things that I'm talking about here, we might be more advanced in the use of artificial intelligence to support the audit process than in any of these other areas. So let me tell you a little bit about how it's being used. One application is the review of contracts and leases and other documents. What typically has happened is an auditor has sat down with a big pile of contracts and documents and read through them, highlighting and commenting on those, on those documents, those areas that need further investigation or more evidence gathered around them. And it is both a mind-numbing, if you like, experience for the auditor, and it's also very prone to mistake. Once you've been reading those leases and contracts for many, many hours, it's very hard for an individual to stay laser focused and make sure they pick up everything in every document. So this new artificial intelligence capability that we've implemented learns from the auditor. So as the auditor reads and highlights and comments on the documents on his or her computer, the artificial intelligence or cognitive engine in the background is learning what they do. And over time, it is now auto-highlighting and commenting the leases and the documents based on the past actions of all of the auditors in the practice, not just not just one individual. The auditor then goes on and reviews those things, makes changes where necessary. Every time they do that, the artificial intelligence engine learns a little bit more, and it has become very, very good at this task. So that's just an example, but any task that is a cognitive task, not a rote task, not something you can easily automate, but a cognitive task that is repetitive and that people do over and over again with large numbers of individuals performing the task, has the potential to be a task that can benefit from artificial intelligence. It's really phenomenal to see how good this technology is and how much it frees our auditors from that very difficult task of going through many, in some cases, thousands of these documents. So that's a really interesting one. The final one I'm going to talk about today is gamification. And when I talk about gamification, I don't mean sitting in front of, with your Xbox in front of your television, shooting your little cartoon aliens. But we're really talking about the use of game philosophies and technologies to focus the audit around those things that are most important. So if you think about your airline's mileage accounts, if you think about frequent buyer cards and so forth, they all operate on this idea of gamification. They all the best example maybe today, our Fitbits. We all wear our Fitbits, and when we look at it at the end of the day and say, well, we've done 9,500 steps when our goal is 10,000, we might be more inclined to walk around the block and get those additional 500 steps than we would if we didn't measure it that way. That type of motivation, information that is given to the individual to change their behavior, if you like, or to get them to act in a particular way, can be used very well here in the audit space. There's two examples where we are commonly looking at this. One is when auditors are looking for guidances and content and things like that they need to review and look at, as they find those particular items that are important to them, they can rate them, give them 5 stars or 4 stars or 3 stars relative to how pertinent that particular piece of information was to their audit. That will allow the audit platforms that they use to serve up the right information more readily and more consistently. So they save a lot of time in searching for those things that are actually going to meet their needs in the context of where they are in the audit. The second one really is in task prioritization. And, those of you who are used to using a task list, if you're anything like me, you'll know that, there are a bunch of things on that list that are really easy to cross off, and it makes you feel pretty good at the end of the day if you cross 6 or 7 things off your task list. The fact that those 6 or 7 things may not have been the most important things for you to focus on in any particular day really doesn't enter into your thinking in the way that it could. And so by weighting tasks in a way that you get points or more points for completing some tasks than others, depending upon the importance of that task to the overall audit result, will help us to get our people to focus on those things that we need them to do now first than perhaps later. So that's just a quick walk through some of the technologies that we're seeing and the impact that we're seeing them have in the audit space. And I just want to finish up by really talking a little bit about, why does all this matter to us? And what is the real ultimate end goal? As I said, in some respects, we're getting, transformation is not a choice in this space. It really is something that you have to do to create the sort of efficiency that's going to be necessary in the market of the future. But there are some really key elements of this that are beyond simply the creating of efficiency and moving towards more data-based analytics and evidence gathering. The first of which is the talent piece. People who do audits are typically very well qualified. They've got masters in accounting, they've had a CPA exam. They spend a lot of time studying and preparing themselves for that professional judgment. The day-to-day job of an auditor, though, oftentimes is collecting, collating, and documenting data. And so, as you know, so less of our millennials, less of our new generation college students are choosing audit as a profession. It's not the type of role that they really want to do with all of the education that they have. And so they very quickly get, leave the profession, go into other types of jobs that bring a little bit more interest and are a little bit more exciting than what they do on a day-to-day basis. So freeing them of all those administrative tasks and giving them back the focus on judgment and really thinking through what it is that the company or the organization should be focused on helps us to keep the staff engaged and keep talent focused on this very important area. The other one that we haven't really mentioned as a requirement or as an output of digital transformation so far today is the whole idea of improving quality. When humans are dealing with large amounts of data, particularly after many hours of working in crunch time, mistakes get made. And oftentimes those mistakes can be avoided through automation. And mistakes in an audit can be very costly. They can be very costly to the client. They can be very costly to the environment. They can take a lot of time and effort to really dig into. And so improving quality and making sure that mistakes don't get made is a key output of some of the automation that we're talking about here before. And I'd say finally, what we hear from CFOs around the country is what they really value in the audit is the insights that they get from the auditors. Auditors are looking through their books, looking through their financial reports, looking through the way their company is being operated, and with a different lens and unencumbered by the day-to-day running of the business. And so through that lens, they gather a lot of insights that are very valuable to the financial community in terms of how they can do their jobs better, how they can make a difference in terms of the focus that they put on their, on their roles as CFOs in the future. So that's just a brief case study of some of the things that we're seeing happening in this space. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Kenny, and he can open up for questions.
All right, Debbie, thank you so much. Very insightful. We are, Bill, I don't know, do we have a key takeaways? Do you want to cover those real quick and then we'll go to Q&A, or you want to jump right to Q&A?
Oh, no, I think we covered those earlier. We should jump right to Q&A.
All right, let's go ahead and jump to Q&A. We do have a few minutes left here, and please submit your questions. Again, you can do that by simply typing in your questions using the questions tab located in the toolbar. If we don't get to all the questions, certainly we'll try to get those to Bill or Christina and Debbie and get some answers for you. But I'd like to kind of just start out, Bill, backing all the way to the beginning of our conversation today. You know, we talked about how important it was to have a clear strategy for digital transformation. You know, for those of us in the public sector, our audience today, who should be involved in developing that digital strategy?
Well, certainly you want to have both a combination of the technology folks, the CIO and so forth, but also the business leaders, the business leaders, the people who are managing the program, who are responsible for the mission, and it's bringing those groups together that's going to create a powerful strategy. But at the same time, you know, in the digital world here today, and how you're doing, you're going to wanting to be reaching out to in a distributed way to many employees and to users and to others as you're developing the strategy. This should be done looking at what a lot of the different stakeholders have to say, what's going on out in the wider marketplace, and so forth. So I would say you want to be, reaching out as widely as you can, and the group that's ultimately in charge of coalescing and building it needs to be a combination of the technologists, the business and mission leaders, and if it's obviously if it's an agency that is run by someone in the political sphere, they need to have involvement also.
Yeah, thank you very much. For all three of you, anybody that wants to answer, do you see state government financial management organizations being able to leverage digital strategies from the private sector? And if you say yes, what are some of the opportunities there?
Well, I can start on this one if you like. I do think that there are a number of opportunities to leverage digital strategies. I mean, if we just go back to the discussion around audit, a lot of what the private, the private companies are doing around audit is absolutely leverageable. I think that the real issue, as Bill alluded to earlier, is how to set the strategy both around, what elements are important and in what order, and how they get funded, and what the investment strategy looks like around that. Because I do think that the private companies have a much easier way of being able to invest in particularly some of the strategy and planning efforts that are necessary to set the stage for some of these areas than the public sector does. So, perhaps some of the strategies and some of those plans that are put together in the private area could be very useful to governments as they think about their own strategies, having a starting point, if you like, and then adopting it from there. And I'd say the other is perhaps some of the point applications that get developed, and how to incorporate those in an overall strategy, because some of those things are going to be very pertinent to the public sector.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Debbie. Anything else, Bill, Christina?
Yeah, I'd add a few things, and some of them, are kind of fun things, but when you think about extrapolating them into the public sector, can start to make sense. Within the private sector, you heard Bill earlier mention things around banking, and within Treasury and within financial management, there's an opportunity to use digital to provide alerts to your customer base, to your vendor community, to other components, and start creating different types of relationships with them. We're seeing more contract management and contract compliance components using digital strategies as well, and that certainly is very relevant to people that are in finance and procurement and accounts payable areas. And so whether it's through the use of a mobile application in that space or through the use of alerts, I think there's definitely an application and a potential transference that you can see. Similarly, in terms of seeing balances and doing some of the analytics that you heard me discuss earlier, the commercial practice is definitely really applying those in the financial market area and within financial services. And those are areas that I think are going to be increasingly ones of benefit to state government, and stronger partnerships between your finance and accounting and budgeting capabilities, and more integration there can come as a consequence of being able to use those analytics from the point of planning your budget to the point of executing on actuals and tracking that along the way. And so you see commercial organizations that have started to use those analytics in that way, and that can then apply as well in state government.
Yeah, and I'll just add a couple other quick ones. I mean, given what NASACT agencies do, you've got investment management decisions are increasingly being based on complex algorithms, deploying big data and predictive analytics. Those can be leveraged. You've got cloud-based treasury management solutions, which are absolutely transforming corporate financial operations, enabling companies to control, it's a very complicated logistics, moving money in and out of various geographies, supporting cash management, forecasting needs across the globe, all very transferable. Also, solutions that include automated fraud detection systems that use machine learning to identify behavior patterns and potentially fraudulent payment activity. Those are 3 additional ones that I think can be easily ported over.
Thank you, Bill and Christina and Debbie. Very insightful today. We are at the end of our webinar. Let's go ahead and begin to wrap up. But I just want to thank all 3 of you for your presentation today. You've certainly given us a lot to think about. I think, you know, every year we do things like this. It seems like there's just so many other possibilities. I feel like we're still at the tip of the iceberg. I know we're all getting better at analytics, for example, but it just seems like there's so many other opportunities that we can embrace. So again, thank you so much for your presentation today. Let's go ahead and begin to wrap up. I also want to thank Anna Peniston of our staff here at NASACT, who helped make today's event possible. And just some housekeeping issues as a reminder for those of you wishing to claim CPE, please don't forget to complete and send your CPE forms as well as the group sign-in sheet to NASACT. The information is listed at the bottom of your group sign-in sheet and the individual CPE form. Also, as I mentioned earlier, please note that the requirement that each group appoint a room monitor to observe attendance and verify the accuracy of the CPE forms. And please make sure that your room monitor signs the attendance record. For those of you attending individually, please respond to the final attendance check that appears on your screen now. Simply type in, "I have completed the webinar" in the questions toolbar, and once you type that, just hit send, and that way, again, we have documentation of your attendance. One last thing in terms of housekeeping, today we are using an electronic evaluation form in an effort to make our processes more efficient. Room monitors, if you would please, make sure that you provide the link to the evaluation form to everyone in your group, and those participating as an individual, you should have received the link to the evaluation form directly. Hope everyone enjoyed today's webinar. In terms of future events, NASACT's next webinar is scheduled for February 25th. We'll be covering analytics, more analytics, the winning edge for the battle for talent. More details can be found on NASACT's website, which is www.nasact.org. Our colleagues at the Association of Local Government Auditors is having a webinar on February 9th on workers' compensation auditing. You know, if that's interesting to you, more details can be found on their website, which is ALGA Online, all one word, algaonline.org. And lastly, our colleagues at AGA, the Association of Government Accountants, their next webinar is January 21st, tomorrow actually, on establishing enterprise risk management in management practices. Again, if you want more information on that, agacgfm.org is the website that you can go to. Again, thank you, Bill and Debbie, Christina, excellent presentation, and I hope everyone has a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, Kenny.
Thank you.